Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 21 of Kerr's Rage, part 1 of the Dwarad Staff Saga by me. And we're going to start off on page 221, where we left off yesterday. Okay. She joined in the fight. Lord knows that I couldn't have stopped her, and her blade claimed the lives of countless orcs before they captured her. I was plying my warbow from the rooftops when I saw them drag her away screaming. But suddenly my building was engulfed in flames, and I was forced to leap to the ground. In the chaos of battle, I landed poorly, and my head struck a water trough. After that, I can remember no more. Closing his eyes, he tried not to think about Karina's terrible situation. We are here on the mission for the king, and if I have my way, we'll try to get your wife back together. Kalor, try to contact the wizard. This is far more than a scouting mission now. Rummaging through his pack, he removed the crystal ball that Grog had given him. In the excitement of their travels, he had never even tried to use it, but now he had to search his memories for the key to its potential. He soon discovered that it was quite simple. With his special talents, the magical globe reacted to his imagination, and his mind's eye traveled to wherever he willed it. He found Elrin von Mathers in his chambers at Khan Keep. Elrin, Elrin, he called, for he could see the wizard at work. But Elrin wasn't aware of his presence within his own globe. But after a moment or two, his eyes glimpsed Kalor's frenzied presence, and he was soon locked mind to mind in conversation with him. Nordtown has fallen, and the orcs have fled to the north. Such terrible news, Kalor, for the king has already sent the first regiment to your aid, but they are too late. The orcs have retreated. Kerr says that they are marching back to their homeland. Did you discover their purpose? We're not sure. If the orcs' raids was linked to an attack we witnessed to the south, then they may be searching for some kind of staff or a necklace. Maybe some evil force drives them to look for some magical artifact. Maybe. Can you follow the orcs and discover their true purpose? We'll pay you all double the original fee. Carmen says that we're going after them anyway. We found one survivor, and the orcs have captured his wife. We're going to help him get her back. Fear not, Kalor, because you're soon to have help. Lord Min of the Dwarves has sent his son and 10 soldiers to engage them. Then we must hurry if we are to rescue any of the captives, because the orcs are sure to kill them if the battle goes against them. My heart goes with you. The king and all of the realm are counting on you all. And with that, their conversation was over, and Kalor relayed everything that he had heard to his company. It was well past midnight before Leander had prepared their evening meal. They all gathered around the cook fire, exhausted from the day's toil. The stew is excellent, Kerr said, the best that I've ever tasted. Surely you mock me. Nay, my friend, mockery is not a dwarven way. I didn't know that you were such a good trail cook. My mother taught me when I was a child. She was a master with herbs of all kinds. It is good, Dow agreed, but we must plan our next move. The orcs won't wait for us. You're right. Speed will surely be our greatest ally, but we will need to keep our strength up if it becomes a long journey. There is also the Baron to consider, Kerr said. There is sure to be a great reward for his rescue. I need no reward, Tarek said, to rescue helpless people from the orcs. And I need no reward for killing them. I was merely stating that some extra benefits may come of this adventure. I long ago swore my life's vengeance against the orcs. I will hunt them until my dying day. Behind his eyes a fire of hatred burned, and none of them knew what it was that made the elf hate them so. The orcs must have some greater purpose, Carmen said, than to merely destroy and pillage. This is a farming town of little real wealth. Not so, Kerr said. My people have prospected for centuries in the hills to the north. Many of them traded ore for provisions here. There may well have been considerable gold and silver. I have seen the orcs raid for pleasure alone, Tarik said. They are little more than cunning beasts that walk like men. I'm certain that this raid was different, Tarik Dartin said. The orcs were searching for something. All the victims that we found were thoroughly searched. Small pieces of jewelry were left on them, but I can't remember ever seeing a single necklace among the dead. It is a possible link to the gypsy raid, Carmen said. For all we know, they are looking for the very jewel that Kalor wears at his throat. Maybe the demon somehow drove the orcs to it. It's possible, Kalor said. But the bandit said something about a scepter or staff as well. Clearly we're going to have to find out for ourselves, Leander said, and the orcs have quite a head start already. I think that Dow will need the night to rest, Tarik said. I'm fit to go, now, if you're sure. Seeing the steadfast expression in the elf's eyes, he knew that Dow was unwilling to allow the orcs any more time to escape. He just hoped that he really was fit to go. Then let's break camp and move out. We've got women and children to rescue. Dow was somewhat unprepared, because all that he had left to him were the clothes on his back and his chainmail shirt. But the battle had left many abandoned weapons on the field, and he found a fine sword with a gold-engraved hilt and 2 unbroken daggers. These knives are lucky, he said, because these 2 alone slew a great red orc, so expertly were they thrust. But what he missed the most was his stout longbow, and so he searched the area where he had fallen, and the gods shined upon him at last, for he found it. In a short time he filled the quiver with arrows that he'd scavenged from orc bodies and from the battlefield. He didn't attempt to clean the dried blood from them, because they had found orc flesh once already, and with his help they would surely find it again. Borrowing a pack from a dead soldier that he'd known, he promised to avenge him. He was again ready for war, but his head hurt terribly, and his vision was blurred at times. Searching the surrounding woods, Tarik found an abandoned mare still with saddle and harness. Her disposition was most foul, but her saddlebags were full of fine provisions, and she still carried her previous owner's bedroll. Now their 7th member had a steed of his own. The retreating horde had left a wide and well-beaten path in their wake. We follow a few thousand orcs and 2 giants, Tarik said. See here, the captives' feet are much smaller, and in single file at the center. They must be chained together, for their footsteps follow the same forest path. But what of these tracks? Carmen noticed. Several groups broke away from the main force here. Flanking guards for the main force? Perhaps, Tarik said, but more likely war parties. They skew off in many different directions away from the main column. The strongest group traveled northeast with more than 10 warriors. Look here, Tarik Kerr said. If I'm not mistaken, I see tracks too big for even the orcs' mastiffs. I think that our friend with the wolves might be with this army. You're right, Kerr. There are no wolves that I know of with prints so huge. All the attacks seem linked, Kalor said. The dire wolves, the gypsies, and Nordtown. We can be sure that there are more than just orcs at work here. What would you do, Leander said, if you were leading a great but not unbeatable army, and the efforts of your search was yet in vain? I'd fall back with the bulk of my force, Dartin said, and send out small groups to continue the search. We'll track the largest war party, Carmen said. Their destination may have been the most likely or important one. But we must go after my wife first, and there's the danger that the dwarves will meet them before we reach their army. It will be a simple matter, Tarik said, to take up the army's trail again. The orcs will be forced to travel slowly, with several heavy wagons and a chain of prisoners. A small detour shouldn't lessen our chances. And I hope that the prince doesn't engage the orcs with but 10 score dwarves, Kerr said. He is a great commander, but the numbers against him are too great. I have little chance of saving her alone, Dow said. for I will forge ahead without you. I have little chance of saving her alone, Dow said, so I will forge ahead with you. Beg your pardon. Tarank followed their trail skillfully. At times, he would call a halt, and then he would often just sit atop his horse and listen for the span of many heartbeats. It seemed to them all that he could somehow sense when the orcs were stopping to see if they were being followed, and then at that precise moment he would stop, often just before they entered an open glade or came out of the shadows of a willow grove. But whether he possessed some sixth sense or simply good tactical knowledge, none of them knew. They were at least a half-day's march behind their enemies, but all of them felt that somehow they would soon meet. Urg, War Master. He led his company along the winding forest trail for many hours. Their endurance was so great that a forced march tired them little, and they stopped only long enough to drink from the small mountain streams that crisscrossed the region. They were entering the lower foothills of the Ogre Fangs, and he knew that they would soon reach the witch's dwelling. Like most red orcs, he possessed a superstitious fear of magic and those who wielded it, but there were some orcs who indeed possessed such gifts, and they were not afraid to use it. He resented the Dark Elf for forcing him to take a powerful shaman with him, but he understood that they would need magic if they were to combat the witch's spells. He hated the fact that an orc more feared than he was among them. He abhorred the fact that he also feared him. But so far, Claw had not tried to take over his command, and the lesser orcs still called him master. As long as he remained in control, then all would be well. Claw was ancient by orc standards, nearly 60 summers old, and his mane had passed beyond gray to white. His skin was weather-beaten and had turned from the red of youth to the brown of old age, but what Urg possessed in strength, he exceeded in wisdom, and his magic was real and powerful. The pace that Urg had set for them would have finished ordinary orcs of his age, but he had long ago used magic to strengthen his body, and he often found himself pushing the young warriors along. Knowing that Urg felt threatened by him gave him a certain amount of influence, but he could use that fear only to a point. He didn't intend to take command, but neither did he contemplate being killed by a jealous rival. He would have to maintain his pace and the respect of his company with care. Urg couldn't argue with the logic of having a warlock among them, nor could he complain that the old shaman held them back. Far from it, for he seemed to constantly push their pace. Some of his warriors would fall back at times, and he was often forced to maintain strict discipline among them. At such times there were many opportunities for Claw to usurp his command, but thankfully he did not. He was beginning to feel more comfortable of his place with the shaman, and he began to think of how much more powerful they were with him among them. His two young scouts, Frum and Gom, were nearly as skillful as they were naive. Their sense of smell was excellent, and it often served to warn his troop of danger long before it was upon them. Taking positions far ahead of them on the trail, they had already detected a small band of elven hunters working their way along a nearby ridgeline. Consequently, he'd been able to move his force to a place of concealment, where they waited until the danger had passed. In this manner, they avoided open conflict, saving their strength for the real mission. His company consisted of 10 warriors, including 2 scouts and Claw. Among them were 2 experienced war leaders, Jawl and Fang, 2 lower-ranking skull smashers, Bok and Darg, and 2 young and inexperienced warriors, Grip and Chomp. He commanded the warriors to defend Claw to the last, while he would lead Jawl, Fang, and the skull smashers against the witch. Hopefully Claw could counter any of her war magic, and then she would be helpless against them. Thus prepared, his scouts led them quickly and stealthily through the forested valleys of the Ogre Fangs. They reached the witch's abode at sunset. The glade was just as Lycurgus had described it, a massive tree, which was so great at its base that 20 orcs could not have linked their arms about it, grew at the clearing's northern edge. Between its roots, a small door stood open and hinged upon its trunk. A soft light shined from within. Under the shade of the tree, a gnarled rocking chair rested, with a small unfinished weaving of yarn lying in the seat. The remainder of the glade was dedicated to farming, and many plants still grew here and there even this late in the season. The clearing was a place of peacefulness and contentment. In fact, it was so serene that Erg nearly abandoned the hunt. All that he wanted to do was lay down in the soft grass and sleep. Looking back, he saw his warriors sinking to the ground like dogs preparing for a nap. And he knew then that it was the witch's magic. He tried to fight against it, but he was so tired, and it had been such a long journey. But suddenly, a force washed over him, and he awoke. Claw had countered the hag's spell. The element of surprise was over, and if they were to succeed, then their attack would have to be swift. He began his war chant, and led his orcs into battle. Joe, Fang, lead Bark and Dog against the witch. He would use the most feared weapon of his people, the red Orcan death bow. They were enormous crossbows forged for the orcs by the Dog, black-hearted dwarves that lived near the center of the world. With the bows weighing nearly 60 pounds, only the strongest orcs could wield it. Having a large reservoir for bolts, it could fire 8 times before reloading. The force of the first shot activated a cunning lever system that both cocked and loaded the weapon for the next shot. As Erg entered the clearing, he raised his mighty weapon and trained it upon the witch's door. Claw began weaving another counterspell. The scouts attacked from the rear. They would descend on the hag like a pack of ravenous wolves. My family. The seeress of the glade was not the helpless old woman that most would have expected. She was quite venerable, but far from senile, and her defensive magic had served her well in the past. Her teacher had been Shireen the Determined, a powerful sorceress in her day, and she taught my family everything that she knew about magic. She was part of a great line of protectors pledged to care for and defend an ancient scepter. At first glance, the scepter appeared as little more than a walking stick. It was fashioned from briarwood, with a straight, slender shaft and a half-moon curve at the top. A perfect diamond was suspended from the crook by a single strand of wire no thicker than spider's silk, and when danger was near, the gem would glow in varying tones of red, corresponding with the greatness of the danger. It worked in much the same way as a dowsing rod, but its true purpose was far more important, for when the proper words were spoken, the diamond would spin and glow bright blue, pointing in the direction of a mighty weapon hidden long ago. At the dawn of the world, that weapon had been unmade, and its parts were scattered. Each component was left guarded by the mightiest beasts, or hidden in the darkest places so that it would never be used again. But its creators foresaw a time when its powers would be needed again, and it was for this eventuality that they created the scepter. And so it was that Shireen had become its caretaker, keeping it hidden and secret for the coming day when its magic would be called upon again. And now, my Fenway, her successor, had become its last protector. She'd been unable to find a student gifted enough to become her disciple, and now her own strength was nearing its end. She'd been busy knitting in the sunshine when the scepter had alerted her to the orc's approach, and as they drew closer to her dwelling, the crystal of the staff glowed brighter and brighter. She knew then that the moment of her destiny was at hand. Her time to defend the scepter from the hands of evil had come. In preparation, she muttered the incantations that would activate the powerful wards that she had placed around her abode. Some of them would bring restful sleep upon her enemies, others would mislead and confuse, while the most powerful would paralyze, burn, or possibly even kill the victim that stumbled across their invisible threads. She added her own power to that of her wards and sent out her greatest spells against the orcs. The first that she cast was the restfulness of sleep, and with that she thought she had won, for nearly all the orcs approaching her sank to the ground in slumber. But something went wrong, and the beasts awakened as if her enchantment had never been. It was then that she saw their shaman. No longer was she using her sorcery against common warriors. Now she was engaged in battle between wizards. Stepping out from her doorway to better view her enemies, she saw their shaman working his own spells against her. But this was her glade, and within it her power was at its height. Every creature, plant, and living thing within the wood was familiar to her, and she to them, and so she raised up the plants of the forest floor against him, the very roots of the trees, tangling vines of bramble and of briar, and they wrapped their clinging tendrils around him in an embrace of death. Too late she realized her mistake, for she then saw the Red Orc's war master raise his crossbow and loose his quarrels, but her magic moved with the speed of thought, which was even faster than the speeding bolts, and she warped the Orc's terrible weapon into uselessness. Her next spell would shield her from the flying barbs, but somehow she was too slow. Perhaps some fell enchantment had been cast upon them, but it made no difference. Her aged body was pierced through in many places. She tried to call upon her healing powers, but her mind was clouded with pain, and her abilities were lost to her. Slumping upon the frame of her lifelong doorway, she slowly sank to the ground. The Orc's vile poison coursed through her veins. If only she'd been a little faster, like when she was young, she thought, and then the darkness took her. And that's where we'll end episode 21, and episode 22 will begin at the top of page 231. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, read Cur's Rage, part 1 of the Dwarteam Staff Saga, by me, and all of the other novels that go with it, The Drums of Doom and The Last Arrow. Thank you and have a great night.